do was to actually just introduce things and get your responses through the chat so I get a sense of the kind of questions that you're asking. But the first thing I'm going to do is hopefully, if I can actually share my screen, or if Leah can actually put my website up so everybody can see it, which is at actionresearch.net, then I can just take you through it. Are we okay in terms of now? I'll just, where it says share my screen, is it possible to share that or not? Can you actually see that?
Yes, we can, Jack. Yes.
Okay, so you can see my screen. Now, all I'm going to do is to take you through, this is my personal, what I call data archive. And it's literally been put together over my own engagement in education over the last 50 years. And what I want just to actually draw your attention to that you can access are the details of the practitioner research I've been supporting. First of all, you can get a free copy of my book on living education theory as a way of life from here. Now, this is what I would also at some point like you to click on and access. And then if you like, in the chat facility today, you can send me your email so that I can actually respond to any questions, because over a couple of hours, we can do certain things, but it will be a prolonged and extended conversation that will help to take the ideas forward. And what I'd like you to do, first of all, is access my writings and just have a look at just the top ones, because this one here, can you see this one about the second International Handbook of Self-Study of Teaching and Teacher Education Practices? Now, you and I can't afford this, but the university libraries can. So I think it might be helpful if your library actually got this, because this particular paper that I worked on with Jackie DeLong, Marie Huxtable, Liz Campbell, Kathy Griffin and Joy Mounter was actually about the self-study of elementary and secondary school teaching, a living theory approach. So I think anybody interested in pedagogy and supporting teachers in those areas to do master's or doctoral work will find that in the second International Handbook of Self-Study. And if you would just remember that I was a founder member of the Self-Study of Teacher Education Practices group of the American Education Association in 1973. And almost 30 years later, we had a symposium on Saturday, which I'll show you how to access in a minute. But the access that you can get is to the symposium, which actually looked at a collaboration between teacher educators in, I hope you can see this on my website. This is the full symposium with Shivana Mishra, who's the director of the Social Studies Department at Sardar Patel University in India, Michelle Vaughan at a university in Florida, Pabati Dongana, who was in Nepal and worked at Kathmandu University. We've got myself, who's a visiting professor now at the University of Cambridge, and Jackie DeLong, who spent many years supporting teachers at Brock University, is now an independent consultant.
Jack, we can't see that screen.
You can't see it?
No, we're still on the description of your writings.
Okay. So let me just see then, can I go back? I'll just see if I can actually, let me just see if I can actually go back and actually, now see, you let me know, please, if you can actually access it from here.
Yes, we can see the front of the website page, Jack.
Is that okay? So yes. I'm hoping you will go into the website, access this, because this was Saturday's symposium. Now, if you think that these are very difficult to get on the AERA program, and we had the only symposium from the Self-Study of Teacher Educational Practices group on the AERA program on Saturday. This was the whole conference. This was the only one. So I'm hoping you'll access that because it's focused on the theme of AERA, which was on accepting educational responsibility. And this is something in terms of the ethics of practitioner research that I'm suggesting that we could all look at ourselves as part of our educational responsibility. It is to actually research our own educational influences and actually make these public and share them both locally, both regionally, but also globally. And this is where we could have quite an influence, I think, on what counts as educational knowledge. And I want to mention that point about educational, because if it is to be educational, I'm suggesting it's not only focused on learning, and I like Gert B. Esther's emphasis that we've got a good language of learning, but we need to develop a language of education. And I'm suggesting further, we need to develop a language of what is educational, and it involves learning, but with our values of human flourishing. And at AERA, with the presidential address, Sean Harper advocated becoming and acknowledging ourselves as active citizens. So we're not only educational researchers contributing to knowledge, we're also taking up a role as active citizens. And the 5 people in the symposium all embrace the value of being global citizens. So I do hope you'll access that symposium and see if you want to take up some of the ideas in that symposium. I then just want to focus on the right-hand side. You can get the symposium here. You can actually also access the current issue of the Educational Journal of Living Theories, and you could actually submit your own living theory, and I'll just go into that very briefly, to this journal. Now, by a living educational theory, I'm meaning that it's your explanation of your educational influence in your own learning, in the learning of others, and in the learning of the social formation that influence your practice and understanding. So you're not only examining your educational influence in your own learning, you're actually making claims to having an educational influence in the learning of others. And this is where, if you like, you can actually publish your papers in other journals as well, so you can get the academic accreditation for being published in really important international journals. But before you do that, you might like to create your own living poster and share that with others, which introduces you to these global networks of self-study researchers who are doing practitioner research. And this is how you can actually create and share your living poster. So this is just to introduce you to all the resources that you can actually access in my own, if you like, personal archive. So you can get a free copy of the book if you're a bit dubious about whether or not individual practitioners like ourselves can get their doctorates from studying our own pedagogical practices. Please go into this section here and you'll be able to access a lot of, there are over 50 doctoral theses that have actually been accredited at universities throughout the world through their practitioner research. You've got John Branch here, Middlesex University, University of Lancaster, Living Theory of International Development. You've got Nipissing University in Canada, University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, Humanistic Studies, Nelson Mandela University. I could keep going down. This was a lovely one about education in Pakistan from the University of Kathmandu. But I just want you to get that confidence that you can actually undertake this kind of work and gain accreditation, certainly a doctoral level, for your inquiries into your own practice and your educational influence in the learning of others. Now, what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is just give you some indication about these points about the rigor and certainly the validity and also the ethics. I've actually just mentioned the importance of ethics in relation to the values of human flourishing that come into the learning for it to count as educational. So usually, if you talk about ethics in relation to practitioner research, it often focuses on what is known as informed consent. And this is rather important if you are working with other participants and you're making claims about your influence with them, that you've got their informed consent. But that is only one aspect of ethics in relation to practitioner educational research. And I just want to stress this because when I studied with Richard Peters and his team of philosophers right in 1968-72, they had the text Ethics and Education. And they really focused on the values such as respect, freedom, consideration of interest and justice, also the procedural practice of democracy, to actually identify the ethics of education. And I just want to emphasize that each one of us here today has got their own unique constellation of values that we use to give meaning and purpose to our lives in education. and that we use as explanatory principles in our explanations of educational influence in learning. And this is really crucial because you are expressing your values just as I am doing now, and I hope you can feel a certain energy that I actually am expressing, because that is very important to put into your values. Whether my first book was on academic freedom and my overcoming of its constraints at the university where I was working, but the energy that I needed and the motivation to continue comes from this kind of energy, which I'm hoping you feel now, and that you will acknowledge should be brought into any explanation of your educational influence. But that idea of the values of human flourishing are really vital. And if you go into those doctorates, you'll see that the very first one to put love as an explanatory principle in the title of a doctorate, that was published about 2008. It was accredited, is by Eleanor Law, and it was about love at work. Now, each of those doctoral theses have been subjected to particular processes of validation. And again, this is really crucial, that if you look at what Jürgen Habermas wrote in his text on communication and the evolution of society, he said there were 4 criteria that we actually apply as we seek understanding with each other. And what I've done is modify those 4 criteria in the formation of validation groups that subject the explanations that practitioner researchers give to these criticisms using 4 criteria. And the criteria are that we should ask a validation group of peers, sometimes between 3 to 8, how do I improve the comprehensibility of my explanation? How do I enhance the evidence that I provide to justify my knowledge claims? Now, the third one is rather different. For example, in my first degree in physical science, I didn't have to use this criteria. But in my work in educational research, I always use it. And it's referring to the socio-cultural and socio-historical influences in my understandings and practice. So the third criteria in terms of validity is that you ask your validation group how you could enhance the socio-cultural understandings and socio-historical understandings that influence your practice and understandings. And the fourth criteria, which I really like, is to do with authenticity. That in your explanation of influence with the values that you're using, then you should demonstrate that you're living as fully as you can your ontological values. These are the values that you use and claim to use to give meaning and purpose to your life. Now, this is what I'm concerned with in terms of validity. And then I'll pause after this point about the sense of rigor, because I was always influenced by Richard Winter, who did a lot of work on rigor. And his book on learning from experience has got 6 criteria. And these are, he talked about dialectical critique, reflexive critique, risk, multiple resource. Okay, now he had one on theory, practice, transformation. Now these are all there, and the plural structure is his 6 criteria. And this relates to the rigor of your explanation of your educational influence in your learning. Richard actually didn't support too much validity, which I do. He really focused on rigor. So what I'll do now is, if you like, I will pause just now and I'll just get into the chat facility just to ask if we've got any questions that you want me to take up now, because we're at about 10 or 15 minutes already. And I want just to make sure that I'm responding to any questions that you might have. So I don't know if Beatrice or Leah might want to actually just look through the chat. I'll come out of this now because this is actually focused. It's focused on the resources that you can now access.